I want to start to talk about a few things just to kind of set the stage. Sometimes you feel as though, oh, grade 9 apply, we're not doing very well. We're here to try to kind of boost that up. And in a way, it can be a bit of a downer. We hear so much about growth mindset, and sometimes we need to think about our own growth mindset and be able to sort of get pumped up about the kinds of things that we're doing. And I want to share with you something that really struck me when I was at a conference in Scotland in January. So last January, I was at a conference called the International Congress for School Effectiveness and Improvement. And in fact, we're hosting that conference in January of this year in Ottawa, where I'm co-chairing it with Doris McWhorter from the Ministry of Education. And we expect, we've already just reviewed all the proposals, and there are people from around the world who are coming to learn about Ontario and Canada, but also to share their own research. So there I was sitting there, and this slide is not my slide. I must admit, I've borrowed this from Pasi Sahlberg from Finland. And he put this slide up and he said, this is basically, he's connecting this to Pisa scores. And he's saying, where would we like to be, or where would a country like to be if the horizontal axis is about equity and the vertical axis is about achievement? So in other words, as you move across the horizontal axis, you're raising equity. And the the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, who does these assessments, measures equity, I'll put it simply, in terms of the size of the gap between the high achievers and the low achievers. So in other words, if that gap is fairly small, then that means that the educational system is doing a great deal to raise the scores of the low achievers, and socioeconomic factors are not having as large an impact. So that's why they think about it as a measure of equity. And so he said, so where do you think a country would like to be? So you can just say so. Which quadrant, what color might be where you think somebody would want to be? Green. So we'd like it to be in green. So the next slide he put up has the flags of all of the countries who took part in Pisa and actually shows where those countries lie. Now he talked about I'll call it cloud up there, but he actually called that cloud to be heaven. And he talked about the countries that were up there in heaven. So he talked about Finland, because of course he's from Finland, Estonia, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong. And he talked about all of the other countries, and you probably can situate different countries. Many people look for where's the US sitting there. And he talked about the fact that all of those countries are trying to climb the stairway to heaven, since he considered that to be heaven. So it was actually a really proud moment. There I was, Canadian, to be sitting in Scotland, listening to somebody from Finland, and then to see the Canadian flag sitting up there, sitting in heaven. And it really had an impact. I don't talk slow to get to that point. Okay. He even used the music, so I'm really copying him. But I don't think that we in Ontario realize how well respected we are. And at this International Congress, there were several presentations by Ontario educators, and the rest of the world is very interested in what it is we do. There have been articles and book chapters written about Ontario, high equity and high achievement. And yet, in many cases, we don't know that. We're just hearing that we need to raise up those EQAO scores. So I think that it's kind of a moment to give ourselves a pat on the back. We have in Ontario very high expectations for our students and for all students. And that means that quite often we're trying to reach that mark in terms of our own province. But when we're viewed internationally, we're doing quite well. So I thought I'd share that with you just to kind of give ourselves a pat on the back. So that's actually where we sat with the with the mathematics. And this is an assessment of 15-year-olds, so it is the work that we're doing, it is reflected there. And the international average is 494, and Ontario's is 514. But quite often we get painted with the same North American brush that moves up from the US. So moving up from the US, I can see that the US score is actually sort of around 479, so it's hard to spot on there, but it's well below the international average. So sometimes the media in the US gets picked up by some of our media people in Toronto or the Globe, wherever, and we kind of get painted the same way. And sometimes people talk about we need to do better, we need to go back to basics. Well, actually, this is a sample question from Pisa. So let's look at this. A seal has to breathe even if it's asleep in the water. Martin observed a seal for 1 hour. At the start of his observation, the seal was at the surface and took a breath. It dove to the bottom of the sea. It started to sleep. From the bottom, it slowly floated to the surface in 8 minutes, took a breath again. In 3 minutes, it was back at the bottom. This sounds like one train left Montreal, another left Toronto. Martin noticed that the whole process was a regular one. So where was the seal? We don't have time this morning to do it. This question is available to anybody. It's on the Pisa website. So not bad for a rich task. But this is not a standard problem. It's not like, okay, this week we're doing seal problems. It's not at all. It's the kind of problem that I would actually see and think, how am I going to solve this? To me, that's a problem if I don't know right away how to attack it. It has multiple entry points. Kids might draw a diagram. They might do a timeline. All kinds of things they might do. But there's no standard algorithm that we use for this particular problem. So that assessment of Pisa, and in fact, there are computational questions on Pisa, and we did quite well on those. It's actually the problem solving that will raise our scores as we try more and more. So something to know is we're actually one of the top performing countries. And not only that, but of the top performing countries, we're one of the few who closes the gap and has high equity. And that's something that I think we need to be proud of and to congratulate ourselves about.